Thank you very much, Dave, and good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Very happy to be here today. Thank you for having me. I'm trying to, hopefully, you are seeing my presentation. I'm kind of new to this, so just Dave or anyone else, if you can, Tracy, if you can confirm that everybody sees.
That's perfect. You're okay. You're good to go. Yeah.
Good to go. Okay, very good. As you can see, it's a balancing act. I think I'll do as well as this skateboarder here. But let's go through this. So again, thank you very much for having me today. My name is Frederic. I work currently. I'm a principal at EY. I joined not too long ago, actually. I come from the industry where I was actually focused a lot on the topics at hand around resiliency of IT systems over the years. And then prior to this, I was a consultant as well. I worked with a number of financial institutions around the globe. And the experience and some of the thoughts that I'm going to share today are coming from that, from all these organizations that I work with, either as a consultant or as an employee, a contributor to the organization. So most of what I'll talk today about is coming from that particular, from that experience, kind of hands-on experience with situations, a little bit like our colleagues before. Had to deal with this over my unfortunately starting to be quite of a long career. So let's go to the next page if I can do that. And quickly from an EY perspective and what we do, just to put things into the context, I've been focusing quite a bit on technology resiliency, and our practice helps organizations with all of it. I think Kevin a bit earlier was mentioning the swans, from the white swans to the black swans. I think we go all the way from the little ducks to the black big swans. It's a whole spectrum of issues, of events, of situations. It's indeed not something that is maybe a differentiator for many organizations, but it impacts customer experience, and it has become really critical that systems be up all the time and be working as smoothly as possible, as it would impact customers, it would impact many organizations' operations from an effectiveness perspective and efficiency as well. So it's important to even the little ducks, like we could maybe refer to them, the daily issues, they are in the way, and all the way to obviously the major disasters. And what's quite amazing in the situation we live in today is even though many of us have worked over the years at coming up with scenarios of disasters, I don't think we were all over the years very focused on some of these major disasters or scenarios, like I'm thinking cyber scenarios or pandemic scenarios that we live in today. They were on the list, but how much time did we really spend planning for those? How many drills did you really run through with our organizations to be ready for those? I guess now in hindsight, as we say here in the US, the Monday morning quarterback, it's easy to say that maybe not enough, right? We could have spent a bit more time on this, and this is lessons learned for the future. We need to really consider all that can happen. So the EY practice helps clients prepare for this, right? Build up their ability to respond to those situations, design and deploy systems that will be as resilient as possible. I wish they could all be self-healing and be really resilient, because incidents will happen. I wish that systems could actually just continue on and not, show any type of defects or downtime. But in reality, we have to deal with legacy systems and the complexity that is ever increasing, and therefore it does have an impact on some of our operations. One of the things that we see more and more is actually the importance of really understanding everything that one needs to have to be able to handle situations like this, incidents, small incidents or large incidents. That's something that requires a careful mapping between the business services and everything that's underneath it. So we're helping a number of our clients to do that. And then you surround data. A lot of it is really critical to the business. At the end of the day, it's at the heart of our businesses. So we need to be able to protect it. We need to be able to recover if something was to happen. When we talk about, the cyber aspect of things, this is a lot about this, especially around ransomware and other aspects of it. But this is something that we see more and more, building isolated recovery environments and these type of things. Beyond all of this, like I was mentioning before, we need to really, sorry, I think it's pausing now. Okay. Hopefully it's working. Are you guys seeing my window moving?
We are not, no.
Or are you still on that particular, sorry. Huh. I won't tell you what software is doing this. It wouldn't be a very good advertisement for them.
That's okay. I mean, it happens. So we're all on a learning curve. Sometimes if you minimize the screen and restart, that can help. Stop the presentation.
And back up, I have your slides too, Frederic.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to do that because I know what's doing this, but I cannot stop it. It's interesting.
So Tracy, could you flip over to the backup and then we could help Frederic out and go through?
Yeah, no problem. Just make me the presenter. There we go. View full screen. There you go.
Okay. So can you just go back a little bit, just one page back up? Thank you. Yeah, so basically what I was saying there is actually a lot of it, and something maybe we should have done this morning, is around testing and drilling. And I guess I didn't test and drill enough on GoToWebinar this morning, so definitely something I'll do next time. But anyhow, helping a lot of our clients and a lot of organizations around these critical topics. So let's go to the next page, Tracy. At the end of the day, when we look at incidents, and again, small incidents, day-to-day incidents to the major ones, right? My experience has been around very often it's the network, it's the infrastructure, right? It's the underlying systems. It's the hardware, failure of the hardware. Very often it's a human error. Probably the most important category of incidents that we see in our systems is everything that's coming from changes that we operate on, that we deploy, that we implement on our systems. It's at those moments, those crucial moments, that something breaks, that an unintended consequence appears, and then we have to deal with an incident. But at the end of the day, my experience is it's a lot about the software itself. The software runs all these systems, and we need to spend quite a bit of time looking at this software. If you look at frameworks, we mentioned frameworks a little bit earlier in the webinar, talking about the fact that it's a starting point. It is indeed interesting to look at all these frameworks across many organizations that I work with, where we list a lot of areas, and we tend to have those frameworks focused on the underlying infrastructure type of areas. And when we get to the software level, it's around the controls that are about the software development lifecycle, but it's not really about the software itself. So I think it's important to really focus on this. The software is really becoming at the heart of everything, and therefore we need to spend much more time on this than we have before. So if we can go to the next page. The software needs to be, because it's at the heart of everything we do today, and it's kind of obvious to say that, but I'll share some numbers after that to show that type of evolution. It needs to be adaptable, it needs to be resilient, it needs to be secure, it needs to be safe. This is kind of the most of our businesses run on it, and when you think about the value of our businesses, it depends on it. Major security breaches, major bugs in the software, software that behaves badly, makes the wrong transaction, is not good at all for the business. So we need to properly test it. We need to properly build it. We need to have it ready from an operational perspective. Obviously, it needs to be cost effective, but it has to be sound altogether. And this takes a lot of work. So we'll talk a little bit today about the experience that I've had in that space, some of the lessons learned, and hopefully aspects of this that could be useful for everybody. So let's go to the next page. Quickly, at a high level, if you look at the software, it's everywhere today. I'm not telling you something that you don't know, but if you were to look at the numbers, it's really staggering. When you look at the evolution of the millions of lines of codes that we have today, that we need today to operate, it's frankly out of this world. Now we can debate the value of using the lines of code as a way to measure it, but without going into too much detail, I think it's a good proxy to see that software is growing on us like never before. It's no longer complicated. It's really at a point where now it's really complex. And how do you manage all of this? And when you look at the amount of work that is required to actually generate this software, and there is software today that generates software itself, but the amount of work is quite amazing. So you want to make sure that you're getting the quality that you're looking for. So let's go to the next page. And talking about the quality that you're looking for, you have to put that in the perspective of maybe a longer span of time, right? The source code doubles every 40 months or so, right? And when you look at the speed of the software that slows down and the compute capacity that grows altogether, it tends to decrease. The overall performance tends to decrease. And as CIOs, we really are in for the long run, so we really want to invest to make sure that the systems are successful or steady. They're safe and sound, and they need to be for a long term. So it is important to really spend the time on this particular aspect of our systems. If you want to go to the next page, Tracy. What's quite amazing when you look at this is that most of our developers are really self-taught on the software framework, the stack that they use. It's staggering. The numbers are staggering, and it's something that obviously they're sharing their experience. They're working together in teams. They're learning from one another. They're leveraging other people's contribution with open source. So it's not like they're on their own, right? And they are obviously focusing at implementing leading practices. But because complexity is such, it's not easy to be able to grasp everything that's happening there. And they kind of have all kind of their own way of doing it, okay? Some may think it's more like an art than a science, which is great because it's actually the source of creativity, which is wonderful, but it's also a very strong source of risk, and one needs to really understand that. Let's look at the next page. In addition to that, the amount of experience that our developers have is actually on the low side. You know, less than 10 years on average, very often less than 5 years. And to actually create good software, you really have to have quite a bit of experience. So the good news there is actually when you go from one type of coding technology to another type, there's a lot of things that obviously you can leverage and therefore your experience will continue growing during your career, and you'll get better and better at what you're doing. But it is important to also remember that most of our coders that are on the top end, if you will, and they're very successful, tend to move on into managerial position in IT organization, and then don't code anymore and do other things, very important things too. They can leverage their experience to actually help others build better systems. But obviously, they're not as close to the software as they used to be. They're not always there to provide that guidance. So definitely something that we want to take into account. And the final piece that I wanted to share with you was just a little bit superimposed on the Dilberts that Kevin did before. Is and we talked about this already, those third parties. I think with Dave later on, we'll talk about this even in more details. But obviously, we depend a lot on those third parties. In my experience, I had a lot of external resources that were working in my organizations. You want them to be part of the team. There's no doubt about that. But you also want to make sure that you can trust them as much as if they were, full-time employees. So there are ways of doing this. You mentioned some, and we'll see some examples later on. I think I'll share some of what I've done in the past in that space. But providing the right tools to those third parties, providing the right metrics, or looking at the right metrics together is actually a good way. It's a good way to do that, so that they can be aligned with your objectives, and they can contribute to the quality of the software that you're looking for. So we'll talk about that in a bit. So this is kind of the challenge, if you will. It's a lot there. So what I suggest is maybe 2 or 3 lists of things to consider. So let's go to the first one. Tracy, the next page. On the software side, if you want, you can also, I did write an article, I think it was last year, around the 10 things that a CIO must absolutely know about their software. So let's go a little bit into that list here. To help people better manage the quality of the software. I'm not going to go into each and every of them. I'm hoping that you guys will have some questions at the end that we can maybe zoom on some of these, but some of the highlights here that are important. The first one I would say is have a standard way to look at things. I think we did mention that often we have too many metrics. Actually, usually we do. There's no doubt about that. Too many metrics, so we can also want to show you some examples of what we can do to correlate those metrics and maybe look at trends. But I think the importance there is that when you go to the different areas of your systems, either by business or by product, by service, by type of software, by platform, however you want to look at it, I think it's another way to compare from one to the other is very useful. So defining those metrics, evolving the metrics as you see your needs evolving, because what you need to look at today might be different than what you needed to look at a year ago, and definitely will be different than what you need to look at a year from now. But that's important. And the other part there that I've been doing typically, and I think will be very helpful, is to on a regular basis look at the health of the software, the health of the systems across all these metrics, to see what are the gaps, and also discuss some of the risks. I think Kevin was mentioning a bit earlier the importance of listing and covering all the risk areas and putting them on the table with your business partners so that you can discuss those risks. It's really important, and I think looking at these health indicators is really helpful to do that. Another one that I would pick out of this list is, for instance, the system level analytics. The experience there is that very often we look at one application or a subset of an application, or maybe a service, and actually going towards microservices and service-oriented architecture. It's even more and more prevalent, where we break things down. So very useful to get efficient, maybe not always to get effective. We can discuss that. But here the point is you need to look at it from an end-to-end perspective. Going back to that mapping point I was making earlier, really understanding everything that one needs to support a service, the delivery of the entire business service with the different components from a technology standpoint. By the way, maybe also the different third-party, maybe even fourth-party services that are part of that supply chain, value chain, if you will, is really critical, and understanding this entire end-to-end view is really critical. So there are tools to do that today that helps organization map all these different aspects. And when looking at this, then one can be testing the resiliency of that value chain, if you will, from an end-to-end perspective. Really critical these days. Obviously, security is really important. So everything that's around the security exposures, vulnerabilities is really critical. And as you probably have experienced yourself, taking care of the security vulnerabilities before going to production is also really important. If you can go back, because even though I did write that article, it's some time ago, so I don't remember all the different details I have on that list. I want to make sure I don't forget any of them. Thank you very much, Tracy. So security is also critical. Everything you can do before going to production is going to cost much less to fix than when it is in production and you have to rewrite the software and you have to fix it. I think a bit earlier we're talking about compliance. Is compliance assuring you that you are secure? I don't think we can say that we're 100% secure at any point in time. But I think we better be compliant with some of the security requirements we impose on ourselves, because we would be at fault not to even implementing what we would consider as being kind of minimal required. That would be kind of a gap there. So to limit our exposure, we can do to improve that compliance is really critical. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about the tech debt. There are also ways to measure the technical debt, and this way you can see how you're progressing, reducing that debt. And in some cases, it might be a good decision not to. There may be some higher priorities, maybe some technical debt to reduce in some other areas. I think here the point is to know about it, to be able to measure it, and to be able to have a rational decision made about that particular debt in an open forum with your partners, so that everybody understands the ins and outs of those decisions. Again, it may not prevent the swans we talked about, but definitely at least we'll step into those situations knowing where we are. So it's also important. And then the last point I'll mention there is nowadays that complexity I was talking about is not only are we dependent on software that we build ourselves and software that we integrate, but this software is also highly dependent on frameworks, open source components, and we don't always have, even though it's open source and therefore you can look at all the details, we don't always do a good job at maintaining the level of versioning of these frameworks, and we leave ourselves exposed to some of the vulnerabilities there, or some of the risk around IP and licenses and so forth. So very important to also know what frameworks or other libraries are being used. It's really critical. So I'll stop on this. This is something we can discuss in more details, but there is the series of areas that one needs to really focus on to make sure that the software is understood and its strengths, and more importantly, its weaknesses are clearly understood and documented and discussed. Now, let's move on to the next page, which is more about now beyond the software itself, is everything one needs to do to reduce the risk, so that software can operate in the way that it is intended and can support the business the way we expect. So two kind of series of activities to consider. These lists don't intend to be exhaustive, but The idea there was to try to pick some of the most important aspects of what I think is very useful once you want to really improve on resiliency. One is so the move to the left and then the moving to the right. Those two kind of concepts is if you're looking at it as the SDLC value chain from the plan to design to build to test and to deploy and operate. So you're going from the left to the right, right? And there, what the concept is the people that tend to be on the left side of that SDLC approach, they are typically your level 3 developers, they're typically your tech support, production support, level 2 folks, operations, IT operations folks. And the big idea there is we need to get them involved as early as possible, even all the way at the planning stage of the systems build. So we'll talk about that in more detail. And then the other idea is that the folks that are on the left side of that particular SDLC process, they are in the planners, the designers, the architects, the coders, the developers, need to be involved, and the testers need to be involved much more to the right of that SDLC approach or process, if you will, much more involved with the operations of the software and the support of the day-to-day business. By doing so, we are equipping them with a better understanding of the different aspects of the life cycle of a system, and therefore we're putting them in a position to create solutions that are more resilient and therefore more effective in supporting the business. So I'll pick a few things out of this list for today's presentation. But for instance, if I were to look at the moving to the left, obviously one of the key aspects there that I would mention is the non-functional requirements. Need to be out there in the open. You need to have a library of those non-functional requirements. Actually, I would even say that maybe the term non-functional requirements is kind of passé. A system that's down is non-functional. So I think we can only talk about functional functions, if you will, when the system is up. So the system being up, the system being performing at the right level is really critical for the customer experience to be positive. So I would consider that there is a continuum here of requirements from functional to non-functional that really becomes altogether nowadays functional. It's quite important to consider that. So it's important to really not only list all the different requirements we talked about with Keith and Marcus a bit earlier, right? But it's also including requirements around performance, requirements around ease of use, requirements, and maybe more importantly, ease of operation. Very often when we go and build those systems, let's use the agile approach and concepts like, for instance, building user stories. We tend to build user stories for the end user. I ask my teams to build user stories for the operators, for the production support people that will have to support this software. Because when things happen, when incidents happen, they're the ones that are there to fix it and to put it back on its track. They need the tools to do that. They need the monitoring tools. They need the data ingestion and data collection tools. They need the proper access to the different levels of the software and the right one, not just the access to the roots and everything else. They need it at the right time. So one needs to really consider all of this beforehand. And then obviously proper documentation, which is also something that we don't have all the time. So they're the best position to really express their needs there. And the good software is a good software that comes with proper documentation, proper runbooks and so forth, so that they can really operate it correctly. So I'll stop for that list. It's a long list there, but I'll go to the next one. Moving to the right is people need to actually stay on the page. People need to also, people that are the planners, the designers, need to think about providing those tools and testing, providing all the different tools that the folks that operate the software need to use. So they need to also be able to test Yeah, can come back, Tracy, on the previous page. Thank you. They need to be able to provide all the testing in production. They need to be able to provide all the exception handling capabilities, the proper error messages, because the folks that are going to operate the software and sometimes actually scale it to their level will need to have access to all of this, right? So that needs to be something that is fully integrated in the software itself. Now, obviously, when you deploy the MVPs and early releases, not everything is going to be there, but you need to have that in your roadmap so that the software can evolve with time. And then, frankly, the other recommendation that I typically make is the folks that have built it should actually spend a bit of time operating it, providing this warranty period, so that they have that experience themselves and can anticipate what needs to be implemented for the software to be more effective. Now we can go to the next page. And this notion about moving to the left and moving to the right is something that over the years I developed quite a bit, especially as we move organization towards new ways of developing systems, developing software a la agile. And it's important to do this successfully. Here is an example, for instance, a happy example about an environment that had, starting kind of the first third of the page, had issues with major incidents. And then what we did is we implemented some of what I had on the previous pages to try to help with the reduction of incidents on one side. Those are the bars that are becoming smaller and smaller, less and less incidents over time, while in the meantime, that somewhat purple diagram, the purple curve here, shows the releases that we're putting into the environment. Now, obviously, those releases tended to be smaller, but they were much faster at getting into production environments, and as you can see, much more stable environment as well. So it has served us, in that particular example, for this particular organization, served us very well. Now, if you were to look at I think I don't put the years there, but if you looked at the time period, you can see that it takes a bit of time. So this is not something that you can do overnight. It's something that will take months. I think it goes back to also another concept that Kevin shared at the beginning of the webinar today, is importance of culture. And allowing people to fail and learn from the failures, and then from there very quickly change their tack, improve on their approach, and make the proper improvements. So that's kind of one example. Let's go to the next page. I'm going to be sharing with you here another example around metrics. Here is something that we built, done that a number of times in various organizations where we talked about the metrics before. There's a lot of metrics. So here the idea was going back to the system health indicators I was mentioning, taking a number of metrics from the environment, metrics that are specific to the system's configuration, specific to volumes and types of transactions and behaviors of systems, profiles, performance, and so forth, metrics around incidents, metrics around change, all of these metrics together. I think this particular example, we were between 70 and 100 metrics that we had sourced from different systems, or various systems that we use to manage our IT environment. And then what we did is we looked at correlation of those metrics. So a number of data scientists worked with us to try to see that correlation, try to simplify the view a bit, right? And we landed on a view around stability, another one resiliency, and then change, and then security. So by themes of these metrics, we were able to look at the different lenses on the systems. And what we were looking at was, we were looking at groups of applications supporting different businesses. How were they doing vis-a-vis one another? So I was again talking about foundational metrics before, so that's an example of that. And then more importantly, the trend. So obviously you have ups and downs in the life of the system, but the idea was to look at the trend over time and try to see if we were moving the die in the right direction. What was interesting there is that obviously we made some investment decisions based on this. Obviously, there were some other investment decisions that were based on requirements from the business from a functionality perspective. But a lot of the technology remediation and resiliency activities were aligned with this. And what was interesting there is applications will migrate from one group to another group depending on their evolution, on what we were remediating. Obviously, we were trying to move them down to the group that's on the green side as much as possible, but the red and the orange, the amber side, were always evolving. And what was interesting there is that we were raising the bar. So there was applications became green, and then some new applications became red because we were raising that bar overall across the entire portfolio to try to get better and better and better. And obviously this work is never done. It is never completed 100%, but at least it's giving you the right direction to go with. Let's go to the next example. Here is an example that's closer to one of the tools we mentioned before. This one is illustrative only, but this is something that I used in the past. I had hundreds of applications that were using it. We had implemented that in our CI/CD process, and teams were asked to run this tool before going to production, and actually way before, not at the last minute, but during the course of the build, they were asked to run this tool. So a couple of thoughts there. One is this is really standard, right? And this is aligned with the CISQ standards. The teams were not to change any of the definitions. So the value of doing that was across the different portfolio of applications. We could compare where people were at, where they were making progress vis-a-vis others, and vice versa. The point there was not to create a wall of shame. The point was there to try to have them learn from others, see what worked with others, and what they could improve. Second key point there is that the idea was before putting a release in production, the overall score, here in the example is like 3.17, the overall score of the release had to be better than the previous score. And then the other rule that we had was the overall security score had to be better than the previous release. The other specific scores around changeability or efficiency, those could actually vary. I would leave that to the decision of the team to decide on this. But the overall two scores that had to be better was the overall score and then the security score. And if those scores were not better than the previous release, they could not release in production. So that was an important requirement that we had. And then the other piece that we used that for, and I don't know if Dave's going to talk about this later on when he talks about third parties, but I know that we touched on this a little bit earlier today, is I was asking all of our system integrators to be using the same tool for all the releases that they were coding and integrating for us. So again, there it was a way to measure how well they were doing. And the thing that I found interesting about this tool, going back to the numbers I shared with you in terms of self-taught coders, in terms of number of years of experience of our developers, is that a particular tool also provide not only the findings, but provides the suggested remediation for that finding, the best practice. So it would give the coder a sense of what to do with the finding, and it would also, what to do with that finding would also be normalized, standardized across the board, which allowed, for instance, you would allow architects to come up with it's a business rule engine type of thing behind it. So they would come up with the key rules that they would want people to really implement. And in this way, it would be normalized across the entire organization, and we would be able to measure on how well we're doing in those rules. So it was very, very useful from that standpoint. And then again, it measures tech debt as well. So it was another way, the coloring schema, if you will, the red versus orange and green there is roughly the score. capture the total quality index and the tech debt, which was something that we were using very effectively as we were planning investment for the quarters and years to come. So a very useful use of the metrics there. Tracy, let's go to the next page. All right, so I think to conclude here, one was about knowing your software, going into the details. It's not a question about checking the box around the SDLC controls. Yes, you have a test plan. Yes, the test was conducted. And yes, it was successful. But it's really going beyond that. It's really having a more of an inquisitive way to look at how effective that is. So it's important to have those metrics and interrogate them on a regular basis at that level. The second key point is operationally ready. So that's shift to the left and move to the right. Something really believe in. It's really helping. There is a number of metrics that can be implemented to measure that, but I would even say beyond the metrics, it's around the DNA of the teams. It's around the way they work together, and it's important to think ahead and not have to try to avoid as much as possible production issues before they arise. And then finally, the fail and learn fast. I didn't talk too much about migrating towards the agile methodology, but I have to say I'm not a methodology bigot, if you will, but I have to say that notion about getting a bit more agile is something that I feel I've experienced it. I believe that it helps because you are dealing with smaller increments of change, and you have people that are much closer to the reality of things, and therefore the change that they make tend to be more effective. And I'm not sure we could talk about how efficient that is versus effectiveness. From that standpoint, actually, I was able to save quite a bit of investment and be able to realize some savings. But in reality, what it allows you to do is really deploy better quality solutions and deploy them faster, and therefore get more value for the business. So I'm not sure it's about reducing the cost overall, but it's really about being quicker on our feet to have better solutions. So I'll stop here. I'll try to share with you some of the experience. I'm looking forward to your questions.
First of all, thank you very much, Frederic. And also, I'm going to send you a Christmas present because I'm on a personal crusade to ban the phrase non-functional requirements. I was brought up in defense and military engineering where we were told never to use it because everything suddenly becomes functional when things go bad. So things like performance, maintainability, reliability, they're as functional as the features I actually use on my phone, because if it doesn't perform, I'm going to delete it. So first of all, thank you for that. A couple of questions. On your second or third, actually I think your fourth slide, you had 10 attributes the CIO should be aware of. Now, at what level of detail is it realistic for a CIO to be aware of the underlying systems?
Well, I think so. Good question. I think the CIO herself or himself, right? I'm not sure they need to be all the time at the code level, right? But having those reports, having those metrics, having these health checks, if you will, with the various teams, I find it to be very useful. At least for me, it was very useful because it gets you, between quotes, back to the reality. You see the good, the bad, and the ugly. You have to discuss it with the team. So maybe at the line of code level per se, maybe not, but actually pretty close, because the idea there is to discuss. Typically, what I would do is I would discuss the top 10 findings on every system, and then we would make decisions from there. I think it's a very healthy approach to looking at that on a regular basis. And frankly, we were also using that when we were looking at those the health of a particular portfolio. We were obviously not going at the line of code with our business partners, but we were able to show them comparison between some of these measurements here with some of the production health as well, so they could see that there was correlation between the decisions we were making, prioritizations we were implementing vis-a-vis the stability of the system. So from that standpoint, it was very useful.
So building on that, do you think existing frameworks that are out there being used in terms of resilience, do you think they're actually missing the area around kind of structural quality? Do they make assumptions that it's somewhere in overall software quality, and quite often it's not being pulled out?
I think so. I'll go back to what Kevin was saying. I mean, I'm not missing, I guess I would say yes, but I think those frameworks is a good starting point. Okay. It gives you kind of the basis. You kind of cover the things that, between quotes, we've sold over the years. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You start with something that stands on its own. I think there, my push has been to add, when you look at the different technology domains, if you will, typically people tend to look at, from facilities, data centers, infrastructure, network system, they go up the stack, right? And then what I would say is we need to do all together from an industry perspective, the folks across various organizations, we need to do a better job at the data layer and a better job at the application layer. But what I call application here is all these systems that work and all requirements, to your point about non-functional versus functional, right? It's the manageability of these applications is really critical. And we've seen that today. If you want to talk about cyber, for instance, right, and you want to protect yourself against ransomware, for instance, data is really critical. I see a lot of folks doing backup and restore tests, right, where actually I don't see a lot doing restore tests. They happen to test restore when they have an incident and they have to restore something. So first, they should do more of that. The second piece is very often when people do this, they actually are using what I would refer to as kind of the physical data validation characteristics, the size of the file, all these aspects, if you will, in terms of the data, so that they could feel that they recover their data correctly, right? I don't see them doing enough data validation, right, for instance, right? Looking at control data in the database, making sure that they have everything there, data quality and so forth, right? So I think we need to go further at that layer. And then at the application side itself, we also need to go deeper. Legacy systems are with us for a number of us, right? Tech debt is there. It's not zero, right? It's always growing. There are entire parts of the code often that is not being exercised anymore because that functionality is not used or is not relevant, right? And we never take the time. We don't always take the time to take it out. So you have a large footprint of code that's not being used, but that footprint is actually a cyber threat footprint. You need to yank that piece out. If you're not using it, it's risky. It generates risk. So I think we need to do that more often. So I think we need to really further develop those habits and those practices to manage this more closely than what we have in the past.
Thank you. That's much appreciated. Some sage advice there. So with that, it just leaves me to say thank you so much for presenting.